Good evening all. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever it is in the world that you are. Welcome. Thank you for joining me tonight. I think we should start tonight with a meditation as we normally do. A meditation in two parts. The first 10 minutes are about just calming the breath, relaxing the body, quietening the mind. Very much a serenity, tranquility practice. And the second part of the meditation, just to cultivate some joy, cultivate some bliss, and just a smiling meditation from Thich Nhat Hanh. So if you'd like to get a comfortable posture, I will share my screen with you momentarily. And take an upright, dignified posture as best you can in consideration of where you are at this moment. A posture that represents your heart's desire to awaken, that represents your heart's desire to move away from suffering, to move towards the end of suffering. So you might let your eyes gently close if it's comfortable for you. Let your belly be soft. In fact, we might say, let your face be soft and allow your jaw to relax. Let your shoulders drop back quite naturally to open up the heart area. Allow your arms and your hands to rest easily. Feel yourself grounded and supported. Notice the points of contact between you and the cushion or the chair, where you connect to the ground. And we might take a very deep, full breath in, a breath that completely fills our lungs. And a very long, slow, deliberate breath out. Feeling the breath in the whole body. For the next 10 minutes, you're invited to cultivate and to practice calm and pleasant abiding in the here and now. For the next 10 minutes, there's nothing else to do, there's nowhere else to go, there's no one special to be or to become. The Buddha's instructions for breath meditation are simple to say, but difficult to practice. Breathing in, I'm fully aware of the in-breath. And breathing out, I'm fully aware of the out-breath. And that's it. Can we bring a simple awareness to the entire in-breath, a simple awareness, to the entire out-breath. Breathing in, fully aware of the in-breath. Breathing out, I'm fully aware of the out-breath. Inevitably, the mind will wander. It's what it does. And as soon as we notice this, we just smile and make a very gentle, non-judgmental note of not breath. And with a smile, we return our whole awareness back to this magical process of breathing. Breathing in, I'm fully aware of the in-breath. And breathing out, fully aware of the out-breath. We are instructed and we are invited to bring a friendly curiosity and affectionate interest to each and every breath. The short breath, the long breath, the deep breath, the shallow breath, the rough breath, the silky smooth breath. We bring an affectionate interest to all the breaths. We get to know what the breath feels like in the whole body, each type of breath. When we're breathing in long, we know that we're breathing in long. When we're breathing out long, we know that we're breathing out long. When we're breathing in short, we know we're breathing in short. When we're breathing out short, we know we're breathing out short. Breathing in, I'm fully aware of the in-breath. Breathing out, I'm fully aware of the out-breath. For the last 5 minutes of our meditation, we change the object of our focus. Using the breath, we calm the body. Breathing in, I calm the body. Breathing out, I smile. Whatever breath it is that brings relaxation and calmness to your physical body, that's the breath we use. Breathing in, I calm my body. Breathing out, I smile. In, calm. Out, smile. Calm, smile. Thank you. I'd like to, if possible, after tonight's session, to edit down tonight's talk so that it might possibly form a standalone presentation. So that may involve some repetition of what we've gone over before, and I hope you find that more beneficial than irritating. And if you find it irritating, you might ask yourself why you find it irritating. The Buddha taught by repetition, as nothing was written down for hundreds of years, and everyone had to remember every single talk he gave. Well, not everyone, but people remembered every single talk he gave. So there will be some recap, there'll be some repetition, there'll be a lot of recap, a lot of repetition. And just to put this whole series of talks into context, in fact, just to put me sitting here tonight, the causes and conditions that brought me here into context, and it's simply to share my formulation, my presentation of what I think I would have found very helpful 23 years ago when I woke up one morning wanting, needing to change my life. But what I share on these occasions are my views and opinions, and that's all they are, views and opinions. They're not necessarily the truth, but I hope you might find them useful. They're not fixed, and my views and opinions change over time, as everything does, according to the characteristic of impermanence. I've based these series of talks on this journey, this imaginary journey from hungry ghost to being human, based on this Buddhist cosmology. But rather than these places being planes of existence, they're really mind states, how we might move from the mind state of the hungry ghost, this place of insatiable craving, to the heaven realm of simply being human, where we're at peace with the 10,000 joys and 10,000 sorrows of what it means to be human. Sometimes we get the opportunity to dwell in the heaven realms with the devas and the gods. Sometimes we find ourselves straying into the realm of the animals, where we just get by, where we just survive, where we live on our instincts. And sometimes, if we're not careful, we find ourselves in the hot and cold torture hell realm, where we beat ourselves up with self-hatred and unforgiveness. So the purpose of these talks is to guide us from the realm of the hungry ghost, this mind state of insatiable craving, to just being human, being at home in the human realm, being at home with joys and sorrows. And let's be, realistic. There's an awful lot of suffering in life, but there's an awful lot of potentiality and possibility for happiness and for joy and for contentedness. So tonight's talk is entitled, okay, where do I go now? Well, before deciding on where we go now, it might be best to go back over where we've been and spend some time to retrace our steps so far on this journey from hungry ghost to being human, hopefully without going through hell. If you haven't already, it might help if you've got the Hungry Ghost booklet to hand, or the Forgiveness booklet, both freely available on the Fifth Precept website for download. We'll start with truth, the first stop on our journey, the truth of dukkha. A lot of these ideas, I prefer to use the Buddhist words because they carry a different meaning from any translation we might get. So this idea of suffering, dukkha, and the truth of dukkha. And dukkha, its original meaning stems from the idea of an axle hole, and a hole where the axle went in. And if the hole was gritty, if it was dirty, if it was a dirty hole, then you had a rough ride. Your wheel would bump and jump, and it gave you a rough ride. And this is the original meaning of dukkha. And how does dukkha manifest in my life? My life is stressful, uncomfortable, uncertain, insecure, disappointing, painful. My life is complicated, it's boring, it's impersonal, it's difficult, it's distressing, challenging, it's unfair. Dukkha in my life, or because of dukkha, my life is incapable of providing any lasting satisfaction. In this sense, life isn't just stressful or a bumpy ride, but in many ways my life is quite traumatic. And this is the truth of dukkha. And it might seem obvious, but there's this feature of being human, generally translated as ignorance, but the Buddhist word is avijja, and vijja is to know, avijja is to not know. But sometimes avijja is not just to not know, but to not want to know. But someday we wake up. Some of us wake up with a desire to be free from stress, free from pain, free from disappointments, free from confusion. Hopefully out of compassion and not out of aversion to where we are. And this is when the truth of existence, the truth of how things really are, is most helpful. And rather than not knowing it or not seeing it or not wanting to see the truth, it's helpful if we start to peel the layers away. So in this sense, satya has three meanings, or satya being truth, being a recognition of the truth, being a realization of the truth. So satya, truth and truthfulness. It's an acknowledgement of the way things actually are. In Buddhist doctrine, satya is linked to the noble truths, Arya satya, noble truths, or true reality, as one Pali scholar translates it as true reality. The Buddha's, one of the Buddha's senior monks, Sariputta, elaborated on the truth of suffering. And he said, and what is the true reality of suffering? Rebirth is suffering, old age is suffering, death is suffering, sorrow, lamentation, pain, sadness, distress and despair are suffering. Association with what we don't like is suffering. Being separated from what we love is suffering. Not getting what we wish for is suffering. The truth of how things really are. The truth of the basic pattern of things. Another one of the truths very pertinent to this journey, to our journey away from suffering, are the characteristics of existence, the characteristics of our being, of everything's being. And that is the characteristic of impermanence, that everything is temporary, transient, and impermanent. Nothing lasts. That's what makes so much of life stressful and distressing. The truth of the impermanence of all things. And the second characteristic of existence is that life is stressful, not just because things are impermanent, but because we resist what's in front of us. We resist the realities of life. And lastly, the third characteristic of existence is that we tend to take things personally, tend to build a self that needs to be protected and projected into our life. And the Buddha says this is very unhelpful. And if we look closely, we cannot find a fixed, unchangeable, permanent self that has any control over our life. Another important truth is the truth of karma. That bright actions, bright thoughts, bright words generally lead to bright results. And the opposite goes for dark thoughts, dark words, dark actions. They generally lead to dark results. And I'm pretty sure I've said it before, I'm sure you could write an equation that says that. And experientially, I think we can all prove that. When it comes to these four truths of life, the four truths of suffering, the four ennobling truths, or the four true realities. In the Buddha's first talk, he determined, or he gave instructions. He said we are undertake four liberating tasks. The first is that suffering is to be comprehended, is to be fully understood, is to be diagnosed. The second liberating task is that craving is to be eradicated, relinquished, and abandoned. The third liberating task is to see, to experience cessation of suffering. Liberation can be personally verified, can be directly experienced. And in one sense, the moment I undertook the fifth precept to stop taking drugs and alcohol, 90% of the suffering in my life and the lives of those people around me vanished. So I had a verifiable experience, direct experience of the ending of suffering. It can be done. And lastly, the Buddha said, we should undertake an eightfold path. The eightfold path is to be developed and cultivated. And he lays out a program for reaching full liberation. Second meaning of satya is simply of truthfulness, of honesty, a truth that does not deceive. It's a definition of Buddhist truth, something that does not deceive. So truthfulness is an honest person or pursuit, being true to ourselves or true to others, and even being true to commitments. And which brings me on to the last use of satya, which is as a commitment, as a vow. At Wat Tankrabok monastery in Thailand, this famous detox monastery, you're not allowed to take treatment unless you make a vow that says, I won't take drugs and alcohol for the rest of my life. And unless you commit to that, they think it's a complete waste of time taking any detox treatment, and they send you away. So satya is not only an acknowledgement of, but also a surrender to truth, to these truths, the truth of how things really, really are, the truth of the basic patterns of things. Such can be a formal vow commitment to a way of being in the world, a commitment to a new life. After treatment at Wat Tankrabok, after taking a vow regarding intoxicants, after treatment, individuals are invited to see a senior monk and ask for a personal satya, a personal truth, a commitment that will benefit their new life. These personal satyas that help the individual step out of perpetrator or victim mode and can support the cultivation of healthy boundaries. So some of the personal satyas that are offered, are recommended after treatment are things like, I will not look outside of myself for happiness. I will not be dependent on someone else. I will not love anyone more than I love myself. I will not let others make me suffer. I will not worry about problems that have not yet happened. And there's a whole catalogue of these personal satyas that people can commit to. In fact, on a 5-day Hungry Ghost retreat, as we work our way through the week, people start to think about this. And on the final day of the retreat, we have a little ceremony and we set up a little Buddhist altar, and people take a satya and make a commitment at the end of the retreat, something that will help them when they leave the retreat. Can be very, very beneficial. So that was our first stop on this journey from Hungry Ghost to being human. This realization that things aren't necessarily how we've seen them in the past. And if we look closely, there is a way out of suffering. Second step is generosity, or this Buddhist word dana. This generosity of spirit and the actual act of giving. The practice of generosity, or the practice of dana, directly develops and supports gratitude and contentment. It's an attitude of mind, it's an act of giving. In terms of the heart practices, where we'll stop off soon, generosity might be seen as goodwill or metta in action. And generosity feeds and supports unselfish joy, mudita. And like the heart practices, generosity is open and spacious. It doesn't contract around an unhelpful sense of self. It's the antidote to the doctrine of insufficiency, that there's not enough to go around. Generosity is also the antidote to selfish and harmful mind states, the antidote to greed, hatred, and aversion, to grasping, clinging, and craving. Generosity of heart and mind is expressed in our thoughts, expressed in our words, and expressed in our actions. This is a generosity of open-mindedness as much as open-heartedness, as much as open-handedness. But more than just the generosity of material things, more than just the generosity of money and time and so forth. Generosity gives rise to living harmlessly, to kindness, to the ability to forgive, and to fellowship and service, and it supports our meditation practice. Generosity is to give to ourselves and to others the gift of fearlessness, cultivated through harmlessness of the 5 universal precepts. To give to ourselves and to give to others the immeasurable and unconditional gifts of the Brahma Viharas, this boundless friendliness, this unconditional compassion, this unselfish joy, and boundless equanimity. And not least, with generosity, we give to ourselves and to others the gift of forgiveness. Excuse me. But there is a caveat on this. I can remember rather foolishly in my last decade of drinking, thinking to myself that if I have £3,000 worth of debt, then I've got a problem. But if I've got £30,000 worth of debt, that's the bank's problem, not mine, which is quite deluded, quite in line with the Buddha's description of how we delude ourselves. But the truth of karma says that actions do not die. And after I stopped drinking, it took me more than a decade, more than 10 years, to repay all those credit card debts and loans and second mortgages. But I got there eventually. But during this time, even though I was chairman of a charity taking addicts out to Thailand, financially I couldn't be as generous as I might have wanted to be. But I made a point of paying all my own expenses wherever I could. And a couple of years ago, I was at the monastery in Thailand and talking to the abbot about what I'd like to do with Hungry Ghost retreats, and the fact that offering a satcha ceremony at the end of the retreat, and generally just trying to spread the word as much as possible. And he said to me, "Vince, you've got to remember," not quite like that, it was through a translator, but effectively, "Vince, you've got to remember that that our arms are not long enough to go around the whole world. So although we might stretch ourselves, we shouldn't overstretch ourselves." The third stopping off point on our journey from Hungry Ghost to being human is that these gifts of sila, or the precepts, these universal precepts that predate Buddhism, in a talk called Rewards, the Buddha says there are 5 gifts, 5 great gifts, primal, of long-standing, traditional, ancient, unadulterated, and never before adulterated, which are not being adulterated and will not be adulterated, not repudiated by wise ascetics and Brahmins. So he's saying that these suggestions already, these suggestions already existed. Not to physically harm anyone, not to steal anything, to be sexually responsible, to tell the truth and speak kindly, and to avoid intoxicants. These 5 suggestions that take so much pain and misery directly out of our lives and out of the lives of the people around us. It's worth remembering that in terms of mindfulness, certainly Buddhist mindfulness, mindfulness is rooted in harmlessness. Mindfulness cares. Mindfulness without ethics, or mindfulness without the precepts, is said to be like, trying to row your boat across the river without first untying it from the bank. You're putting a lot of effort, but you don't get very far. So these precepts, these suggestions, they're not rules, but they're suggestions for training oneself. They're a personal, experiential ethics. We can see what happens if I go around punching people. What happens if I go around threatening people? What happens if I go around telling lies and speaking harshly? What happens if I have no regard for sexual boundaries? What happens if I pick up things that don't belong to me? I think most of those things happen if I pick up a drink, or if I use drugs and alcohol. So do good things come out of my using drugs and alcohol? No. But these are personal ethics. We take them on ourselves, and there are a couple of characteristics of personal ethics in Buddhism, known as hiri and ottappa. which are about personal ethics. My conscience, my self-respect, is hiri, and upata are about a moral dread and how I'm seen and perceived by others. So these precepts, these suggestions, can be widened out, not just personally, but they also become community rights. And when we live in a community, when we live in society, we should be able to say, I have a right not to be threatened. I have a right to feel safe. I have a right to have my property respected and not stolen. I have a right to have my sexual being respected. I have a right to be spoken to truthfully and spoken to kindly, and not to be gossiped about or slandered. And I have a right to be free from intoxicants and drugs. So we have community rights as well as personal rights. Along with generosity, the precepts can be seen as a movement from the contracted selfishness, or from contracted selfishness to the unbounded selflessness with a healthy sense of self. At the end of that rewards talk, the Buddha ends the talk by saying about the refuges and the precepts are streams of merit, streams of the wholesome, nutriments of happiness, heavenly, ripening in happiness, conducive to heaven. They lead to what is wished for, desired and agreeable, to one's welfare and happiness. Our fourth stop on this journey together was at the Brahma Viharas, the heart practices. I said before about the Buddha's insight into what the mind frequently thinks and ponders becomes the inclination of the mind. And as rephrased by Christina Feldman and others, what the mind frequently thinks and ponders becomes the shape of our mind, and the shape of our mind shapes our world. So where do we want to live? What world do we want to live in? And these Brahma Viharas, these divine abodes, are somewhere that we can build our world around them. We can dwell in the Brahma Viharas, these heart practices that support each other equally. These practices of universal friendliness, of unconditional compassion, of unselfish joy, and of boundless equanimity. Longchen Rabjampa, Buddhist monk from the 14th century, said, "Out of the soil of friendliness grows the beautiful bloom of compassion, watered with tears of joy, under the cool shade of the tree of equanimity." These are called the true faces of love. But we could also add dana, we could also add generosity and forgiveness to these heart practices. These attitudes of being that are a manifestation, an expression of warm-heartedness. They are relational and experiential. The Buddha instructs us to incline our mind in every direction, above, below, and all across. All directions, in all areas of our life. It's important to remember, and certainly it helped me enormously in early recovery, in early waking up to this new life, to offer loving kindness for oneself, to have compassion for oneself. As the saying goes, you need to put on your own oxygen mask first before you can help others. These Brahma Viharas help to break down and dissolve the boundary between self and others. We might think, make everyone be free of mind states that cause harm. We might not be able to love or to like everyone or everything, but we can at least try to maintain a warm and open-hearted friendliness to all our relationships, all our experiences. Even to the point where we may be able to wish our enemies that they be free of greed, free of hatred, free of delusion. We may wish our enemies to be free from fear and free from confusion. In these current difficult times, when differences in skin color can generate so much separation and so much suffering, we might remember what Nelson Mandela said in his autobiography, A Long Walk to Freedom. He said, "No one is born hating another person because of the color of his skin or his background or his religion. People must learn to hate. And if they can learn to hate, they can be taught to love. For love comes more naturally to the human heart than its opposite." We practice these Brahma Viharas. We practice kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity unconditionally, not expecting anything in return. But the Buddha says, if we do this, if we practice these boundless qualities, then there are some natural benefits, some natural rewards. There are 11 benefits that the Buddha lists. He says that you'll fall asleep more easily. You'll awake easily. You won't have any nightmares, any pleasant dreams. Human beings will love you. Non-human beings and animals will love you. Devas, the angels, benevolent beings will protect you. External dangers, poisons, weapons and fire, or maybe hatred, anger and slander, will not harm you. Your face will become radiant. Your mind will be serene and easily concentrated. You will die unconfused, and you'll be reborn in happy realms, in the realms of the Brahma Viharas. Our fifth stop on our journey from hungry ghosts to being human was at the forgiveness stop. Whatever our past history, we can be immobilized by a sense of guilt and shame. Guilt's not very helpful. It contracts, solidifies around a fixed self. It actually contradicts impermanence. I was bad, I am bad, I'll always be bad. And that's not possible. You have to work very hard to maintain that. Forgiveness practice, particularly through the dual lenses of the ethical precepts and the hindrances, which is in the diagram in both the Hungry Ghost booklet and the Forgiveness Workbook. Forgiveness practice through these dual lenses of the precepts and the hindrances gives us an insight into the causes and conditions that allow suffering to arise. When this is, that is. From the arising of this comes the arising of that. When this isn't, that isn't. From the cessation of this comes the cessation of that. So rather than guilt, we might cultivate remorse. Remorse acknowledges and embraces impermanence. Remorse says, that was who I was. It's not who I am now. It's not her will be in the future. So remorse acknowledges that there are causes and conditions, and we can make different choices. Everyone wants to be happy and free from pain, but we go about it in very unskillful ways that often hurts us, others, and hurts ourselves. Ultimately, forgiveness is a gift to ourselves. It's another act of generosity. We can free ourselves from the past and live fearlessly and harmlessly in the present. I forgive myself for not understanding, and I forgive myself for the mistakes of the past. Our sixth stop on our journey is around mindfulness and meditation. Remembering that sati, or Buddhist mindfulness, has its roots in keeping something in mind, remembering something you'd heard. In a Buddhist sense, it's to recollect what needs to be recollected. I like to simply say, to remember, to remember. The Buddha gives us many images of the far-ranging scope of what mindfulness does, what Buddhist mindfulness does. Its protective nature, its caring nature. And one of my favorite images of mindfulness is that of the surgeon's probe, where the surgeon's probe is used skillfully and carefully to examine our wounds and to promote whatever healing is needed to heal our wounds. I like the image of the city guards. A city with 6 gates and 6 guards, and the guards only let in what's helpful and keep out those senses that are unhelpful. And then there's the image of the elephant trainer, who, having taken the elephant out of the forest, then trains the elephant with kind words to adapt to his new environment, to adapt to his new life. So mindfulness is a training, kind training. The other side of this stop is meditation, particularly these 2 ends of the same stick, serenity and insight. Blaise Pascal, the French theologian and mathematician, 16th century, I think, he said, all of humanity's suffering comes from man's inability to sit alone quietly in a room. So with our training, with our serenity and tranquility training that we started our session with tonight, this meditation to allow us to come to stillness, to find some peace, is very, very helpful. It reverses our constant need to keep going and run away from what we find to be unpleasant. The Buddha says, what is needed for the direct knowledge, for the full understanding, for the utter destruction, for the vanishing, for the fading away, for the cessation, for the giving up, for the relinquishment of hatred, delusion, anger, hostility, envy, miserliness, deceitfulness, arrogance, and intoxication. These 2 things are to be cultivated. Which 2 things? Serenity and insight. So serenity is about finding and cultivating stillness and enjoying joy and bliss, and cultivating joy and bliss. Our insight meditation gives us a glimpse into the true realities of impermanence, of suffering, and how it arises and passes, and of non-self, of how clinging to a fixed sense of self just leads to more suffering. One of my favorite little Buddhist talks, Buddha talks, was the Buddha saying that there are two illnesses. What two illnesses? Sickness of the body and sickness of the mind. There are to be seen some beings who can admit freedom from suffering bodily sickness for 1 year, 2 years, 10 years, 50 years, perhaps even 100 years. But it's hard to find beings who commit to freedom from mental illness, even for a moment, except those who have destroyed the defilements of greed, hatred, and delusion. The psychologist Rollo May said, "I would define mental health as the capacity to be aware of the gap between the stimulus and the response, together with the capacity to use this gap constructively." This sort of summarizes mindfulness and meditation, the ability to know where our mind is, to respond rather than react to our environment. I like to use the acronym MARA, Mara being the saboteur, the killer, the destroyer, Mara being the inner self-critic who tries to stop us reaching our goals. But I like to turn it on its head and use Mara as an acronym for mindful awareness responds appropriately. So with mindfulness, when we train the untamed mind, we can respond and certainly reduce our reactivity to our experiences. Another quote from Nelson Mandela: "The cell is an ideal place to learn to know yourself, to search realistically and regularly the process of your own mind and feelings. Internal factors may be even more crucial in assessing one's development as a human being. Honesty, sincerity, simplicity, humility, pure generosity, absence of vanity, the readiness to serve others, qualities within easy reach of every soul, are the foundation of one's spiritual life. Development in these matters, or development in matters of this nature, is inconceivable without serious introspection, without knowing yourself, your weaknesses and mistakes. At least, if for nothing else, the cell gives you the opportunity to look daily into your entire conduct. Regular meditation, say about 5 minutes a day before you turn in, can be very fruitful in this regard. You may find it difficult at first, but the 10th attempt may yield rich rewards. Never forget that a saint is a sinner who keeps on trying." The 7th stop on our journey from Hungry Ghost to being human, where we dwelt last week, was in fellowship, in Sangha, in community. And I will repeat in part what I said last week. The good friendships serve our basic human need for contact, the healthy desire to be supported and to support others. Our relationship in fellowships or Sangha or community can be manifestations of many other parts of this shared journey. That is, the noble intention to follow a path away from suffering, the noble intention to be generous, the noble intention not to cause harm to ourselves or to anyone else, the noble intention to be kind, to be compassionate, to be joyous and well balanced, the noble intention to fearlessly forgive and to be fearlessly forgiving. And the noble intention to support each other in formal and informal mindfulness and meditation practices. The Buddha's cousin Ananda said, "This is half the spiritual life, Lord, having admirable people as friends, companions and colleagues." And the Buddha replied, "No, Ananda, don't say that. Having admirable people as friends, companions and colleagues is actually the whole of the spiritual life. Fellowship is one of the refuges. It's a place that we go for support. We go there for safety, for certainty and for security. Our delusions or our ignorance, the not knowing or the not wanting to know, the blind spots, the biases and distortions around our own unskillful and unhelpful behaviour can't be remedied on our own. Ajahn Sucitto, the English monk, says that we need community because we can't see the back of our own head, using that analogy about shaving our heads. And Ajahn Jeff, or Tan Jeff, the American monk, says we need community because we can't see through our own delusions. So Sangha, fellowship, community, whatever we call it, is a place of noble friendship, a place of shared values and goals, a place of mutual support, an engaged, caring and healing environment, a place of practice, accountability, guidance and self-discovery, a place of refuge or belonging, a community where you can feel at home, a place of respect and love. Remember, you don't have to walk this path alone. The Buddha says that the best protection and the highest blessing on this path comes from avoiding fools and associating with the wise. He says that good friends are the whole of the path. Okay, that brings us up to date. Okay, where do I go now? Of the path so far, this satya, this truth and commitment to the truth, truthfulness, dana, generosity of spirit and the acts of giving, sila, this commitment to harmlessness, these suggestions for removing harm from our life and the lives of those around us, and the heart practices, the Brahma Viharas, the divine abodes, unbounded kindness, compassion, unselfish joy and equanimity, and forgiveness, the ability to fearlessly forgive and to forgive fearlessly, to free ourselves from the past, to acknowledge our own mistakes and to forgive others. And then training our mind and cultivating joy, developing insight into the nature of suffering and its arising and passing, insight into impermanence, into suffering, into not self. And then the fact that we don't have to do this alone. Fellowships, there are communities, there are sanghas to support us. So I hope some of this gives us the bigger picture. It is like a jigsaw puzzle. Many of the pieces, they don't fit exactly, they just overlap. Having seen some of the important parts of this puzzle, we might remember to remember. We might not forget. We might not fall back to sleep. We might remember what we've heard. Certainly remember what we found useful. We might find the freedom to think for yourself, seeing the truth and committing to it. We might notice the difference between abstinence, as stopping ourselves from doing something, and abandonment, as totally giving up, which might also be seen as the similar difference between, in Buddhist terms, restraint and renunciation. The renunciation is the complete letting go, the complete dispelling or disenchantment, breaking the spell. It should be noted and experienced that 99% commitment is far harder than 100% commitment and total commitment. We might commit to join a Sangha or start a community, start recovery meetings, start going to recovery meetings, or start a recovery meeting. There's plenty of choices out there. 8-step recovery, refuge recovery, Dharma recovery, 5th precept sit and share meetings. I think there's heart of recovery meetings. And even if not a Buddhist orientated or Buddhist inspired meeting, you might choose a non-secular meeting. A secular meeting, a smart recovery meeting, or a traditional 12-step fellowship. But certainly community is very helpful in walking this path. You might consider attending a retreat. There are plenty of Buddhist and secular Buddhist retreats around all over the world. I hope to start teaching again by the end of this year, and certainly next year. I'm already looking at offering 5-day retreats in Thailand and England, and I'm open to invitations to teach anywhere, and if I can build it into a mindful itinerary, that's always very helpful. So the more planning in advance, more notice, the better. But certainly, just attending one retreat a year, even if it's a weekend or a single day, can be very, very beneficial. You might decide to study some of these Buddhist ideas, either in a clinical fashion, a secular fashion, through mindfulness-based interventions, or some of the early Pali texts of the Theravada tradition, or even some of the Zen or Mahayana Tibetan traditions, to choose a field of interest and look a bit deeper and deepen your own practice. You might consider a satcha vow, a personal vow that you commit to. When I'm on retreat, I often refresh my drugs and alcohol vow that I will not take drugs and alcohol for the rest of my life. But I also commit to not looking outside of myself for happiness and not loving anyone more than I love myself. If you wanted to take a personal satcha, there's an appendix at the back of the Hungry Ghost booklet with a little script you can use and some suggested personal satchas. If you get the opportunity, you could always take yourself to Wat Tam Krabot Monastery in Thailand and formally take a satcha with a monk. If you come along to a 5-day Hungry Ghost retreat with me, we always make that opportunity available at the end of the retreat. Remember this element of mindfulness that emphasize what is important to remember in this moment, what needs to be remembered, what needs to be kept in mind. So remembering Mara, that mindful awareness responds appropriately. We do have a choice. And maybe the appropriate way to respond to any situation is from the Brahma Viharas, from the heart. Viktor Frankl, in his book Man's Search for Meaning, says, everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's own attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. The Buddha encourages us to have 5 remembrances, 5 things not to forget. At the end of Hungry Ghost retreats, even 1-day retreats, I tend to give out blessing cords, or I'd like to call them mindfulness cords. And I suggest to people that they tie a knot in their cord. Something that they want to remember. Not just a shopping list on the way home. One pint of milk, a tub of ice cream, please. But to remember something needs to be remembered. And we go through these 5 remembrances, tying a knot for each one. But I said, You should remember that you're going to get sick, and there's nothing you can do to stop yourself getting sick. You should remember that you're going to grow old, and there's nothing you can do that will stop you growing old. You should remember that you're going to die, and there's nothing you can do to stop yourself dying. So you should remember that everything you love, everyone you love, every experience you love, you'll be separated from it, from them. And lastly, he said, you should remember that your only true possession, the only thing that you can claim ownership for, is your karma, are your actions, your thoughts, words and deeds, and their results are your only true possessions. It's now 2:15, and I'd like to have 5-minute meditation now, and just to start winding down this last session. For our final meditation together, just a reprise of this cultivation of the Brahma Viharas, of these attitudes to life, these attitudes to our experience, to taking an upright, dignified posture, and remembering this posture represents my heart's desire to awaken, my heart's desire to move away from suffering, to move towards the end of suffering. So even if it's not upright in the sense of sitting on a cushion, to make it as upright as possible, dignified, alert and awake. And then we might whisper silently at the back of our mind, may I find stillness in the midst of chaos. And just dwell for a moment in what that means. What would that mean to you? May I find stillness in the midst of chaos. May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. What would that look like in your life? May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. May I be safe and well in the midst of uncertainty. What would that feel like? To dwell at ease in the midst of uncertainty, to feel safe and well. May I live with kindness, even in the midst of all that is difficult. Is that a real possibility in your life? May I find stillness in the midst of chaos. May I be at ease in the midst of discomfort. May I be safe and well in the midst of uncertainty. May I live with kindness in the midst of all that is difficult. May I find stillness. May I be at ease. May I be safe and well. May I live with kindness. Thank you. I must ask for your forgiveness because time hasn't allowed for questions and answers. But I do have some closing comments. Just reminding us once again that what the mind frequently thinks and ponders becomes the inclination of the mind. I can't stress it enough. So knowing what you're thinking and pondering, knowing where you're dwelling is so important to liberation. So I entitled this talk, okay, where do I go now? Really, there's nowhere to go. There's no destination. There's only the journey. Coming ever closer to the end of suffering right here, right now. Nirvana isn't a state or a place or a time. Nirvana is what we experience when we experience the absence of greed, the absence of hatred, and the absence of delusion. Happiness does not lay outside of ourselves. It's no one else's job to make us happy. Happiness does not exist outside of now. So with the Buddha's 5 remembrances in mind, we might remember not to postpone our happiness for some other time, some other place, some other experience. And if we're going to wander around in circles, let's make those circles worthwhile and keep going to places that we know benefit us, we know resource us, we know bring us closer to nirvana, closer to happiness. The first noble truth, or the first true reality of not getting what we wish for, and that's suffering. And the final verse in the long version of Rumi's poem, The Guest House, always sticks with me. It's something I repeat to myself often. He says, "And if the pearl is not in sorrow's hand, let it go and still be pleased. Increase your sweet practice. Your practice will benefit you another time. Someday your need will be suddenly fulfilled." So we don't always get what we want. and we get an awful lot of what we don't want. Nirvana is described as putting out the three fires: the fires of greed, the fires of hate, the fires of ignorance, or if you like, the three fires of craving, aversion, and confusion. The third true reality, the third noble truth, is that suffering can be brought to an end. This true reality is to be realized, to be directly experienced, and it can be personally verified. It is possible to experience freedom from craving, freedom from aversion, freedom from confusion, to experience everyday nirvana right here, right now. Appreciation and contentment with what we have right here, right now is everyday nirvana. Not suffering for what we don't have right here, right now is everyday nirvana. The attitude of I have enough is everyday nirvana. The attitude of I am enough is everyday nirvana. Everyday nirvana, inclining our heart in every area of our life, in public and in private, towards kindness, compassion, joy, and equanimity. Everyday nirvana is the aspiration I set every morning when I step out of bed, when I say to myself, may I greet today with joy and appreciation, may I greet today with friendliness and kindness, may I greet today with generosity and acceptance, may I greet today with understanding and acceptance. Setting that intention, putting things in the mind to help me through the day. May you allow yourself, if not to love yourself, then at least to like yourself, just as you are, right here, right now. And perhaps you might indulge me, and if it's comfortable for you, you might put your hand on your heart. And I know that your mic's still muted, but you might put your hand on your heart and you might recite after me. How wonderful I am in my being. I delight that I am here. I take joy in my good fortune. May my happiness continue and increase. So these series of talks and everything that goes with them is offered entirely freely, open-handedly, open-heartedly, open-mindedly. Nothing is expected in return, unconditional, as in the Brahma Viharas, as in any generosity. But if you would like to support my livelihood and support these teachings as I take them elsewhere, hopefully to India and to Kenya soon, then a donation would be very much appreciated. And details are underneath the YouTube, in the comments underneath the YouTube video, and on the Hungry Ghost website. A reminder that Sit and Share meetings are on Mondays and Thursdays. If you'd like to join us on Sit and Share, details are on the Fifth Precept website. And I'd like to finish our time tonight with a poem by Lee Nyuk Kyin Kyu, whose name I've grossly mispronounced. But she was a Zen Buddhist nun 1,000 years ago in 11th century Vietnam. She said, "Birth, old age, sickness and death. From the beginning, this is the way things have always been. Any thought of release from this life will wrap you only more tightly in its snares. The sleeping person looks for Buddha. The troubled person turns towards meditation. But the one who knows that there's nothing to seek, knows too that there's nothing to say. She keeps her mouth shut." So that's it. I've said enough. But if you would like to sit on retreat with me or hear more from me on retreat or podcasts, then feel free to sign up for the Hungry Ghost newsletter on the Hungry Ghost Retreats website. So all that remains for me to say to you now is thank you very much for your company. Thank you very much for accompanying me on this journey from hungry ghost to being human without stopping in hell.